we on the same page?
Okay, Kuf Lamed Vav in the Mishnah. Look the Mishnah. HaKoisev nechasav lebanav tzarech sheyichto me'ayom alachar misa. If you give the nechasav to your children, you have to write me'ayom alachar misa divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi omer eino tzarech. You don't have to. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean anytime you give something to your children, you have to write it. What's the case? Says Rashi. HaKoisev nechasav lebanav. Bari sherotze lisa isha. There is a bari who wants to marry an isha. Ve'ena rotze l'shabe nechasav le'ishto. Pen yafsidu banim sheyesh lo me'ishto rishona. So he has children from the first marriage, and now he wants to get married for the second time. V'rotze lichtov lahem nechasav la'achar mosa. But he wants the properties to go to the children from the first marriage. Ela sheyochal peros bechayav. He wants them to inherit all of his properties, but he wants to be able to use the properties in the meantime until he dies. Tzarech sheyichto mehayom la'achar misa demashma. Mehayom yehekane lecha haguf levado. So from today you get the land. Ula'achar misa tehei nigmeres hamatana sheteachal gama peros or shetochal gama peros la'achar mitasi. So after I die, you'll get the peros. Aval below hayom lo nasan lehem klum de'in matana la'achar misa de'bahishayte ein lo chelak ben sheyuchal la'aknosan. Because you would ask, okay, if he's going to keep the peros anyway, so then the might say, why does he have to give it to them hayom la'achar misa? Because once he dies, he can't give it to them. Because it's going to go seemingly to the Yorshim from the second marriage. Therefore, what does he do? He says this, he has this way around it where he gives everything mehayom ula'achar misa. Mehayom, it goes to the Yorshim. He can give whatever he wants. He's still alive. So mehayom, the land itself, goes to his children from the first marriage. Ula'achar misa means that until he dies, he gets to still use the peiros of the land. Once he dies, now they can use the peiros of the land as well. And that's going to work. Rabbi Yossi Omer Eino Tzarech. Rabbi Yossi says it's not necessarily to write Mehayom. Hakosev nechasav libno la'achar moso. Similar case, but if you look here, for some reason, the Rashi goes all the way down to the bottom. So it's 6 lines from the bottom. Hakosev nechasav livno. If you do this case where you write a libno or to somebody else la'achar moso, like we said, Mehayom la'achar misa. So ha'av yochel limkor m'neshen ksuvin laben, v'meinen yochel limkor m'neshen b'shus av. Now, neither one of them can sell it because they both, as we want to simplify it, they both own half of the property right now. The father owns the peiros of the property, and the son owns the land itself. So he can't sell the land because the peiros still belong to the father, and he can't sell the peiros because the land belongs to the son. Machar ha'av mechurim ad sheyamus, machar ha'ben ein lokech bem klun ad sheyamus ha'av. Says, what happens if they go ahead and they do sell? So aveinu yachol limkor la'acher haguf ve'ha'peiros hagamre. He can't sell everything, because since the peiros go after misa, that's fine, but the guf right now is the son, so he can't sell the guf right now. Haben and yochel limkor lagamre, both. Again, they can't sell lagamre because each of them only owns half. However, obviously, as Rashi says, the ben can sell the guf for now, the father can sell the peiros for now, but he can't sell the entire thing because they each only own half. So let's say they go ahead and they sell the entire thing. Machar ha'av mechurim at sheyamus. So if the av sells its stam, so then the peiros will be sold. He can sell the peiros for the lokeach until he actually dies. So if the lokeach buys from the father, the lokeach can actually eat the peiros until the father dies, at which point he can no longer eat them because now it's in the property of the son. And if in fact he sells the land, the son, then Lamaisa, the guy can own the land. Why would it be the nafkamina? Seemingly, he can make the profit on the amount that the land goes up during this time, the lokeach. But as soon as the father dies, so that's it. Because now what? Again, if the son sells the peiros now, then the son can sell the peiros now. The son cannot sell the peiros now, but he can sell the land right now. But as soon as the father dies, then the land's going to go back to everybody. Here, let's read it inside. Machar ha'av stama mechurin leperosen lelokeach at sheyamas ha'av. If the av sells stam, then the peiros go to the lokeach until the father dies. Aval lekeshayamas ha'av yitol haben gama guf gama peiros. Because again, the ben had the guf the entire time, and now the guy was able to own the peiros while the father was still alive. Ohu ohaba mikocho. What? Stam, that means he didn't say that I'm selling it just the peiros or just the land. He sold the entire thing. Again, we said he's not allowed to do that. So if he does it, then it's as if he sold his own portion that he was allowed to sell. Lo shna meisa b'chayav ben v'lo shna meisa ben b'chayav. We're going to see what that means. Shaperos macharav. Val guv kanoi legamri leben misha shekasa lo av ukshemeisa ben rakach av yesh lo banim lo sa ben hinyor. We're going to get to that. Machar haben b'chayav ein lelokeach beperos ad sheyamos ha'av sharehu kemen. I said it the opposite. That when he goes ahead and he sells it b'chayav, so now the guy gets the property, but he can't yet get the peros until the father dies. And again, we'll see exactly what that means. But at the end of the day, again, each one cannot sell the entire thing. If they go ahead and sell it stam, or they sell the entire thing, so then Lamaisa, the part that they currently own, will go to the lokeach, but it'll only go to the lokeach, assuming that it doesn't then revert back to the father or the son at the time that the father passes away. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Zak the Gemara. If he writes Mehayom Alachar Misa, why does that help? Again, going back to the first part of the Mishnah, that if you want to give your son, or you want to pick which sons from the first marriage, for instance, you want to give them the stuff, so you need to write Mehayom Alachar Misa, because if you don't, so then everything's going to go after Misa, and it's going to go to the second set. So Mehayom Alachar Misa, we said Mehayom, the son gets the land, Ulachar Misa, he'll get the Peros. Because Mehayom Alachar Misa, Mahavi, does it really work? Hatnan, but we have a Mishnah that says that if you write a get, Mehayom al-achar misa, get ve'eno get. There's a suffix whether it's a get or not, because we're not sure whether Mehayom al-achar misa means that it should take effect when I die. Me'achshav get imamus. It should be from now when I die, or it could be what that you're going back Mehayom, and then a minute later you change your mind. No, la'achar misa, i.e., I don't want to really give a get, since a get can't be chal la'achar misa. So is it that it's going to be chal from today? When I die, it'll be chal retroactively from today. Or am I changing my mind right away and saying, I want to give you a get? No, I don't really want to give you a get. So Gemara is not sure. Therefore, it's get for no get. It's a safek get. What happens when you have a safek get? Well, she's safek married, safek not married. Therefore, immes, if the guy dies, if the husband dies without any children, cholat says v'lo misyabemes. If he dies without any children, so then we have the problem of him. If he dies with children, nothing to talk about. Then he's dead, and whether it was a get or not, Lamaisa, she can marry whoever she wants. But now, if he dies without children, so she might need to marry the Yavam, or she might be usher to marry the Yavam. If, in fact, she needs to do Yibum, so then she needs to marry the Yavam. If she doesn't need to do Yibum, then she's usher to marry the Yavam. That's the way that it works in Halacha. You can't marry your brother-in-law unless he's a Yibum, even after your husband dies. So, v'imeis choletzes v'lo misyabemes. So now if the husband dies, since we don't know what to do, so she needs to do Chalitza, because she might need to do Yibum, but she can't do Yibum because she might not be allowed to do Yibum. But what do you see over here? You see that when you have a safek get, how do you treat it? You treat it like a safek get. We're not sure, so you need to cover both parts. So what would happen over here if you have a safek matana? How would you treat it? Safek matana, seemingly you would not say that it's a matana. Right? Why are we treating it like a matana and we're saying that it's koneh? But l'maisem hayom alachar misa, it should be a safek matana, as Rashi says. If you look at the Rashi. Rashbam, I'm sorry. If you say over here, V'hachanami, it's like 6 lines up from the skinny lines, 6 lines before you hit the wide lines. V'hachanami havalan lemeimar de matana safek hivelo kanu. It should be a matana safek, because we're not sure, Mayom alachamisa, is that a matana or is it not? Says the Gemara, Hasa misaf galani tna have ichazarave, aval hacha hachikamarle gufa kani mayom peir lachamisa. Saying no, the answer is that by a get, so you can't have 2 things. That means you can't have part of the get today and half of it tomorrow. So we say, we're just not sure. Do you mean that you want to give the get? You don't want to mean the get. We're not sure, so it's a safek get. But over here, since, as we said, you could work it out that you're giving half and half, i.e. you give the land as of today and the peiros la'achar misa. Therefore, that's what we're going to assume, and that's why in this case we assume that he's giving the land today, the peiros la'achar misa, but in the case of the get, which is a safek get, we have to be machmir both ways. That's what the Gemara answers. Okay. Talk to Gemara. That's the case of Mehayom Ula'achar Misa. Rabbi Yossi Omer Eino Tzarech. You don't need to even write Mehayom Ula'achar Misa. And even if you don't write it, so it could still be koneh to the guy today, the land, and the peros after Misa. Rabba Baravua Chala. She was sick. Al Ligabe Rafuna Rav Nachman. Rafuna Rav Nachman went to go visit him. Amar Le Rafuna Rav Nachman. So Rafuna said to Rav Nachman, do me a favor. I'm embarrassed. Ba'i minei halacha Rabbi Yossi, wain halacha Rabbi Yossi. Can you go find out whether the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi or not? Amarle, Taimei de Rabbi Yossi lo yadana halachi ba'ilei. So Rav Nachman said, I don't even know what Rabbi Yossi's reason is for his halacha, that it would be okay that you don't have to write Meyom Alacha Misa. I'm going to ask him if the halacha follows him. Amalei, don't worry about it. Ad Bai Minei Alacha Ilo. I'm too embarrassed. You ask him whether the halacha is like it or not. V'tamei Anamin Alacha. And after you do that, I'll explain the reason for you. I understand the reason. I'm just too embarrassed to ask him. So you ask him. He'll think you're the Amaretz, and then I'll explain the reason to you afterwards. Bai Minei. So he asked him, Amarlei, Hachi Amarav, Alacha Rabbi Yossi. He says, what's the story? He said, Alacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Basar Denafku. So after they left, Amarlei, so he promised him he would tell him the reason. Hainu Tamid Rabbi Yossi, de Amar, Zmano shel star mochiach halav. Tani Nami Hachi Rabbi Yossi Omer, Eino Tzarech Nesh Zmano shel star mochiach halav. What does that mean? It means, Eina Chanami. Rabbi Yossi agrees that if you don't write Mehayom La'achar Misa, and there's no time on the star, so then Eina Chanami, of course, is not going to be kona to the children Mehayom. However, if I write in the star that it's June 7th, 2017, and then in the star I write that the property should go la'achar misa, so if I didn't want it to go from today la'achar misa, I wouldn't have written today's date. I just would have written la'achar misa, after my death, the property should go, and we would know that it takes place after misa. The fact that he wrote today's date, so what is he trying to accomplish?
Did he say from this date, or just the date was on the top?
Just the date on the top. That's what it seems to say. That Zmano shel star mochiach halav. The fact that he wrote a date on the top of the star, that's going to be mochiach halav. Therefore, what? If it says June 7, 2017, or the equivalent of the Hebrew date, so we will know by definition that's mehayom. And then when it says in the thing, Yud Gimel, and when it says in the thing, should have known, last day of no tachanan. And then when it says in the thing, ula achar misa, that's for this year. That's for the peiros. So again, if it says June 7, 2017, Yud Gimel Sivan, and then in the thing it says, I want to give my property la'achar misa, then from the fact that he wrote a date which he didn't have to write, we know that he's giving the property mehayom. And the fact that he writes la'achar misa, what he means to write is that I'm giving the peiros la'achar misa. But in Achanami, Rabbi Yossi would agree that Lamaisa, if he writes mehayom or la'achar misa, it would be fine. So again, if you learn like this, you don't have to necessarily, if you want to learn like this, you don't have to necessarily say that they're arguing. Rabbi Yossi says that if the actual star is dated, then you don't have to write Meyom Alachar Misa. And one can argue that maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree with that. Seemingly not, but one can argue that Rabbi Yehuda would agree that if the date is that if the star is dated. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you have to write Meyom Alachar Misa no matter what. Rabbi Yossi is saying no. If it's actually dated June 7, 2017, then Lamaisa in the star, even if it doesn't say Mehayom, the fact that you put a date on there will mean that you're selling it as of today, and then the peiros will go after Misa. Yes?
Essentially, the law, if you sign something, you put the date, you sign it just as a matter of point of information that you actually dated, but doesn't mean that,
Okay, so he was saying that again, according to Rabbi Yossi, halachically, since you didn't have to have the date, why didn't you have to have the date? Again, here, since it's only transferring after his Misa, it doesn't matter what day you wrote the star. The point is that if you wrote the date on the star, you meant to do at least part of it before he died.
But if there was a lien on the property, or a lien comes up, then the date does matter. If you give your property from
But again, if I would have just given it la'achar Misa, so then we would know when the guy died. The fact that he's writing the date.
Well, if it's la'achar misa, now he takes out a loan, and there's a shibud against.
Okay, but we know when he died or not. The fact that he wrote the date is showing that he wants to give the property as of today, according to BOC. Why would he? Because otherwise we know when he dies, so we'll know whether there was a loan before that or not. What would be the?
We can make a shibud and property doesn't belong to you. If it's from Mehayom, he wants to get a loan. He wants to use it.
That I don't know. That's a separate. I don't know. You're saying if the son wants to now take out a loan, Mehayom.
Or the father.
Seemingly, according to the way we're learning, the son actually owns the property as of today. It'd be his property. Zak the Gemara. It's not even up to the complicated part yet. Zak the Gemara. Ba'amine Rava me Rav Nachman. Behakna mahu. What happens if it's ba'akna? What does that mean? Rashbam says, Bishtar, it's about 10 lines down on the wide lines. Bishtar shekasubo kinyan. If the star, again, the star that we've been dealing with so far is the kinyan itself. The star is the matter of acquisition, where you give the star and you say, with this star you acquired mehayom alachar misa. Let's say the star is not a star that's actually acting as the kinyan, but the star is recording what actually happened. So the star is recording behakna. It says that Adim actually did a kinyan on behalf of the son. So Amarle Bakna in Tzarech. So if you have a star in there that says that Adim did a kinyan on behalf of the son, then it doesn't have to say Ma'ayom Alachar Misa. If the Adim did a kinyan on behalf of the son, and it records that he did a kinyan on behalf of the son for the property, so then obviously it doesn't have to say Ma'ayom Alachar Misa. Rav Papi Amar, Rav Papi says, Ika aknisa de tzarech ve'ika aknisa de lo tzarech. It depends what the wording of the language. It depends what the language of the star was. Akne ve'kanina mine lo tzarech. Kanina mine ve'akne tzarech. If it says acquire it and then it says we acquired it, you don't need to say it. If it says we acquired it and then it says acquired it, tzarech. 1 second. Let's just read a little bit further. Is there actually going to be a case where you're telling me now we're going to judge based on how the Sofrim wrote it? Do the Sofrim know so much that they're going to go ahead and based on their language we're going to decide what halach is? Yes. It depends on what they wrote. So Rafuna, Breda, Rabbi Shua, Amar, Bein Akne ve'kanina minei. Bein kanina minei ve'akne sounds like a ksuva the way that we write it now. Lo tzarech. You don't need to write it. What's going on over here? So let's say it outside. If we're recording again, this star is not affecting the transaction. We said that if the star is affecting the transaction, now with the star, we're affecting whether the son gets it or doesn't get it. So then it depends what the father writes. If he writes Mehayom al achar Misa, then it goes to the son from today, the field, and the peiros after Misa. If he doesn't write Mehayom al achar Misa, then depending on whether there's a date in the star or not, you'll have the machlokas. But assuming that there's no date and he doesn't write Mehayom al achar Misa, then it will not go to the son as of today. That's clear. But what happens now again, if the star is not acting as the means of the transaction, the star is actually acting as the proof that the Eidim actually did a kinyan on behalf of the son. So now the Gemara is saying that it depends what the Lashon is. And the Gemara at the end, Rav Huna is saying it doesn't really depend, but as long as you have a Lashon of kinyan, it's going to be fine. That means as long as the star tells us that the Eidim did a kinyan on behalf of the children, Lamaisa, that means that they did a kinyan on behalf of the children. As of today, the land will belong to the children. The parents will still belong to the father until he dies. But what's this whole discussion of akne versus vikanina mine? Well, if it says in the star akne vikanina mine, it means it says twice in the star. On the top, it says that the guy told us, the son told us to acquire. This is what the Eidim are testifying in the star. The son, it's like a story. The star is like telling us a story of what happened. So the Eidim told us that the son asked us to acquire it. That's akne. V'kanina minei. And at the end it says that we acquired it. So then lo tzarech. Then the way the Gemara is learning, and again the reason that Rav Huna argues is because it's hard to understand exactly why this should make a difference, which order you said it in. But the way that the Gemara is learning, as the Rashbam explains, is that if the beginning of the star says that the Eidim testified that the son asked us to acquire it, and then at the end of the star they said we actually acquired it on behalf of the son, according to Rav Papi, that point is like superfluous. It didn't have to tell us that twice in the star. The fact that it tells us this twice is not just to tell us that we acquired it on behalf of the son, but it's to tell us that we acquired it on behalf of the son, mehayom. But if you would do the reverse, and you would say, we acquired it on behalf of the son, and he told us to acquire it, then the way that he's learning is that, well, they're telling us what happened in the beginning, we acquired it, and then they're telling the whole story of what happened, and he told us that he should acquire it. Then they're like reviewing and chazering everything that happened. Then it's not extra. If it's not extra, then it's not mehayom. Again, Rav Huna says it doesn't really make a difference. And once you go ahead and you say bein akne, bein kanina mine, which is a little bit easier to understand, once you say twice in the same star, we acquired it, he told us to acquire it on behalf of him. Once you say that twice, it's superfluous. You don't need to tell us twice in the same star that you acquired it or you were going to acquire it on behalf of the son. Therefore, one of us tells us that you acquired it on behalf of the son. The second one tells us that what? You didn't just acquire it on behalf of the son, you acquired it on behalf of the son, mehayom, from today, and therefore the son gets the property mehayom, ula achar misa, he will go ahead and get the peros. That's how the Gemara is explained between Rav Huna and Rav Papi. Then the Gemara ends, uveduchrin padgame dahave ba'anpa pligi. If the document doesn't actually say that they testify that they acquired it on behalf of the son, it just says that it's a testament, that it's a testimony to matters that are before us without any mention of a kinyan, then there's a question. That means if the Eidim come and there's no mention of any kinyan, they just mention that they were talking to the son about acquiring a property, this and that, then pligi, then there's going to be a machlokes. Do we actually assume that they acquired it on behalf of the son, and did they acquire it mehayom, or did they not acquire it on behalf of the son? And now the Gemara just says the same thing a different way. Amar Rav Kahana, Amrisa l'shmaisa kamei de Rav Zvid min Arda. Amar li ason hachim masinola. This is how you taught it. Anan hachim masinola. I taught the same way, just without the question. Amar Rav Nachim ba'aknai netzarech mein akniye vekanine minei ben kanine minei ve'aknei lo tzarech beduchron padgime dahavu ba'anpei pligi. That's what the Gemara says. Again, not the easiest Gemara, but in essence, again, just outside what he's saying is that if you go ahead and you say mehayom l'achar misa in the shtar, that's where the shtar, there's two possibilities. The shtar could either be acting, or three possibilities. The shtar could be acting as the mean of transfer. That means the father gives to the son the shtar, and it's acting with that shtar to transfer the property. Then it depends if it writes mehayom l'achar misa or not. If it writes mehayom l'achar misa, or again within Rabbi Yossi, if it has the date, then l'maisa the son will get a mehayom, and then he'll get the peros l'achar misa. The other possibility is that it's not actually acting that the father is giving him the land or the peros with this shtar. This shtar is actually just telling us what Eidim saw, or what Eidim say. So if Eidim say that he was makne it, if Eidim said that they asked us to acquire it, the son asked us to acquire it on behalf of him, and we acquired it on behalf of the son, so then we assume that they acquired it mehayom, they acquired it from the date that they actually acquired it, they were acquiring the land mehayom, ula'achar misa, the son will actually get the peros. And then in this last case of, as the Gemara calls it, uveduchron pidgame dahave ba'anpana, where it says that it was in front of us, but there's no mention of a kinyan, that's where we're not exactly sure. As Rashi says, shtar edus below kinyan, then we're not exactly sure how we're going to treat it, whether we're going to treat it that the son gets the property from today or not. Zok the Gemara, hakosev nechasav livno la'achar moso. Says the Gemara, itmar, machar haben b'chaye av, umeis haben b'chaye av. We said again that if the son sells it while the father's alive, so he's not really allowed to sell the entire thing because he only owns the land at that point. If he sells the entire thing, so we said what happens? So the lokeach can get the land at that time, but he'll only acquire the peros after the father dies. But let's say now that the son sells it, and then the son dies before the father dies. Well, why should it make a difference? So let's see. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yochanan lo kana lokeach, Reish Lakish Amar kana lokeach. So what's the case here? Again, you have the case where a son sells it while the father's alive. So the buyer, we said, doesn't get the produce until the father dies. But if the son dies before the father, then what's the problem? So the problem is that there's a question whether the main owner of a field is the person that has the right to the field, or the main owner of the field is the person that has the right to the produce. Let's assume for a second, and it's called, again, kinyan peros ke kinyan haguf dami. That means that the right of the produce is the person that is the main owner of the field. And kinyan peros lav ke kinyan haguf means that the right of the produce is not the main owner of the field, and the person who has the right to the land is the main owner. What happens if you say that the person who has the peros has the right to the field? He's the main owner of the field. So who has the right to the peros in this case? Who has the right to the peros? Well, I'm trying to make it simple. Okay, I guess not. The father has the right to the peros. We just said, again, just to clarify, if the son sells the field while the father's alive, the buyer doesn't get the produce until the father dies. The father owns the produce during his life. In all of these cases, the son gets the produce after the father dies. The son gets the land while the father's alive. He gets the produce after the father dies. So the father's the one with the produce during the time. The son is now dying before the father dies. That means that when the son dies, who is the real owner of the land? The father was, if you hold that the kinyan aperos is kinyan aguf dami. Well, that's a little bit of a problem, because if in fact the father is the whole main owner at this point, then the son, his sale to the lokeach doesn't really go through until what? Until the father actually dies. Well, at the time that the father dies, where's the son? He's no longer alive, and he can no longer affect that sale. And therefore he says, lo kane lokeach.
Why do you say the main owner? Is he the sole owner?
No, because the son still has the...
As far as the land...
Again, right now the father owns the field, and he's selling it mehayom la'achar misa. So the field itself is going to the son. The peros are staying with the father. So depending how you look at it, they both 50% owners in the field. But we're calling, the question is, who are we going to refer to as the main owner, i.e., who's the real owner at the time? I don't say main owner, the real owner. At the end of the day, who's halacha considering to be the main owner? Well, it depends. If you hold that kinyan peros is kinyan aguf, then the person with the peros. If you hold not, then the person with the field. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is who has a right to sell it. So yes, he has a right to sell it, but the kinyan, even though he's selling it now, the kinyan is not being chal until the father dies. Well, if the son never actually was the main owner of the field, he really retroactively had no right to sell it. So as long as the father, if you say that kinyan aperos is kinyan aguf, then the person who owns the produce is the main owner, or the quote-unquote halachic owner as of now. And therefore, since the father retains the right to that until his death, when the son dies, he still never possessed the right to sell the land. Even though, quote unquote, the land was given to him by the father, it wasn't really going to be chal until the father died totally. We were treating it in the son's possession for anything that it went up in value, we're going to treat it. But Lamaisa, at the end of the day, if you want to say logistically, halachically, when did it actually transfer hands? When the father died. Yes, it was mehayom, and he could sell a mehayom, but it actually is not going to transfer until the father dies. And therefore what? Therefore, when the father dies, if the son already was dead, then the son can no longer transfer it to the lokech, and retroactively everything really stayed with the father the entire time. That's how he learns. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo kana lokeach kinyan peres kinyan aguf dami, and therefore the father is the main owner. Reish Lakish amar kana lokeach kinyan peres lav kinyan aguf dami, because if the son is the main owner, so then he had a right to sell the land even while his father was alive, and therefore even though he dies before his father dies, it doesn't matter, because he was the main owner even while he was still alive. And Lamaisa, therefore, he had a right to sell the land, and even if he ends up dying before the father, the sale will go through. This is not easy Gemara, but trying to make it easy.
It's like
yeah.
a wife who brings in Karkala, whether it's Soin Barzel or not.
And therefore what?
So the same thing happens. He gets, not Soin Bar, but the other way.
Nichsei Malog, yeah.
So he gets used to the produce, but after she dies, he gets the property too.
Right. So the question is what happens. So we're talking about now that you sold it before he actually died. We have this machlokas already once about whether the owner of the produce is the main owner or the owner of the land is. The idmar mocher sadeu lepeiros. Rabbi Yochanan amar mevi v'kori. Reish Lakish amar mevi v'eino kori. Rabbi Yochanan amar mevi v'kori kasavar kinyan peres kinyan aguf dami. Reish Lakish amar mevi v'eino kori kinyan peres lav kinyan aguf dami. What's this case? It's a case of bikurim. We know that the person who goes ahead and rents the land, or whoever's using the land, needs to bring the bikurim. The kore part in Parshas Kitavo is only read if you actually are the owner of the land. So that's the nafkamina. If we consider the guy who has the payros to be the main owner of the land, then not only is he going to go, it says two things. First of all, it says artzacha, you need to bring the food from artzacha. So everybody agrees that when you bring it from artzacha, that's the person who's actually using the land at the time. It's similar to the mezuzah. If you're renting a house, you're the one that's chayiv in the mezuzah. So artzacha says whoever is the one using the land right now, you need to go ahead and you need to bring the bikurim. But then when it talks about the person who's going to be koreh, who's going to read the psukim, so it says adama asher nasata li. It says the adama that was given to me. Well, who's it given to? It depends. If the person who owns the payros or is able to use the payros now is considered to be the main owner, then the Maisa, he could be koreh as well. If the person who's using the payros is not considered to be the main owner, but the person who owns the land, then this guy who's bringing the payros is not the main owner. Therefore, he can bring the payros, but he can't actually be koreh. So therefore, Reish Lakish, who says, maybe ve'eno koreh, he's going to hold like we said over here, maybe ve'eno koreh, that's going to be that he's not koreh because he's not the main owner, because the person who owns the produce does not own the main land, and the main owner still owns it. The regular owner still is the main owner, because he's the one who owns the land. And Rabbi Yochanan will say, maybe v'koreh, because when you have the right to the produce, kinyan aperos ka kinyan aguf dami, and therefore at this point we're considered that you're the full owner, both in terms of bringing the bikurim and being able to be koreh as well. Amlacha Rabbi Yochanan, so Rabbi Yochanan again, Rabbi Yochanan who holds that the rights to the produce is the main owner, kinyan aperos ka kinyan aguf. So he'll say, Afa gav de ba'alma kinyan peres ka kinyan aguf dami, and therefore over here the father is the main owner. Hacha itzterech. Therefore, we still need to tell you over here about the son. Salgadai dechamina abba legabe brea chule achel kamash malan. So if in fact the owner of the produce is always the real owner, why do you have to tell me that the son can't go ahead and sell it b'chaye av? Because you might think that for a father to a son he's going to be mochel. And even though in general the owner of the produce is the main owner, maybe a father will be mochel and say, even though in general the owner of the produce is the main owner, since you're my son, I'm going to let you go ahead and sell the land in my lifetime. Says Gemara, Kamash Malan, he can't do that. He can't be mochel that right. And if he's the owner of the payros, he's the owner of the land as well. And therefore, if the son dies before the father, it will not go through when the father dies. For Rabbi Shimon ben Laksham, Afagav de Be'alma Kinan Peres Lafka Kinan Aguf Dami. And Rish Lakish says, even though the right to the land is the main owner, i.e. the son, so why do you have to tell me that the father can't sell? Because you might think that the father has a right, even though in general Kinyan Peros is Kinyan Aguf, and the son is the main owner. Maybe you would say over here that the father doesn't want to give it over to his son, and even though in general it is going to be the owner of the Peros, is going to be the owner of the land, maybe over here the father Dafka will say, no, I want to be the owner of the land. Lamaisa says the Gemara, no, Kamash Malan. Again, Rish Lakish says, Avagadama kinyan peros lavka kinyan aguftami. Even though in general the produce of the owner of the produce is not the owner of the land. Maybe the father, Lagabe, his son, wants to be makbid that even though he goes ahead and in general the owner of the land is the main owner, over here, since it's all his land and he's giving it to his son, he's going to say, I'm retaining the rights to the land even though I'm giving it to you from now. Kamash Malan, he can't do that. And once he gives it Me'ayom Alachar Misa, the son becomes the main owner of the land as well. Eis ve Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asks Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the right to the produce is the main owner. Kinyan haperos kinyan haguf. He asks Reish Lakish, who says that the right to the land is the main owner, i.e. the son. Nichse lecha v'acharecha yirash ploni v'acharav yirash ploni. Very interesting case. If a shchiv meira, who we're going to call A, just to keep things clear, says to my property should be given to lecha, to number one. And when you die, it should be given to number two. And when he dies, it should be given to number three. Now, even though in general, obviously, when somebody dies, it goes to their kids. But if I'm giving the gift on condition that when you die, it does not go to your kids, it gets passed on to number two. And when he dies, it does not go to his kids, it gets passed on to number three. So, Meis Rishon Kana Sheni. Meishani Kana Shlishi. I can make that condition. However, Meis Sheni B'chaye Rishon. If number two dies while number one is still alive, and therefore when number one dies, really, who's it supposed to go to? Number two. But he's no longer alive, so it should really now go to number three. But since number two is the broken link in the chain, where's it going to go? Yachzru anechasim liyorshe rishon. It should go to the yorshim of number one. What's the problem? Why is it a kasha? Vim isa, and if you're right, this is Rabbi Yochanan asking Reish Lakish a question. If in fact the right to the land is the main owner, so then liyorshe nosein mibayile. Because what are we assuming here? The Gemara at this point in asking the question is assuming that when I, A, give over to number one, and he gives to number two, and he gives to number three, what am I giving him? The land or the peiros? I'm giving him the peiros. Therefore, I'm giving the peiros to number one, and I'm saying when you die, you have to give the peiros to number two, and when you die, you need to give the peiros to number three. But I'm holding on to the land the entire time. The right to the land is the main owner. Therefore, what? What should happen? When number one dies, it should go to number two. But if number two dies, it should go to number three, the peiros. What happens if number two is not in the picture anymore and number one dies? Well, who owns the land? I do. Therefore, since the produce can't go to number two, who should it go to? It should go to my yorshim, not to number one's yorshim, if you hold that the right to the land is the main owner. If the right to the produce is the main owner, so then when number two dies, and number one needs to now pass him on when he dies, so since he has the right to the produce, he's the main owner, and it goes to his yorshim. So the fact that it says that it goes to the yorshe rishon proves that the rights to the produce is the main owner and not the rights to the land. Kasha on Reish Lakish. Says the Gemara, no. Amar le kfar tirgum Rav Yoshea bevavel acharecha shani v'chein Rami Rabba barafuna kamei derav av Amar acharecha shani. You're right. In general, you can still say, says Reish Lakish, that the right to the land is the main owner. Over here, it's going to be different because he said acharecha. The fact that he says acharecha means that he wants to convey not only the produce, he wants to convey the land as well. And if he's conveying the land as well, then you have no problems. Then I'm giving the land to number one. Number one is giving the land to number two. Number two is giving the land to number three. When number two dies before number one dies, and now number one dies, number one doesn't just own the produce. If he just owned the produce and it goes to his yorshim, then it shows that the produce is enough. But if he owns the produce and the land, everyone will agree that it goes to his yorshim. That's what the Gemara says. Vatanya. Now we have another kasha. We'll end with this. The kasha now is not on Reish Lakish. The kasha is on Rabbi Yochanan. Yachzuru liyorshe nosein. We see that in this very case, where A gives it to one, and one gives it to two, and two is supposed to give it to three, and number two dies. So it says what? If one then dies after number two, so then it's going to go to the yorshim of number one. What does that seem to prove? If we throw out the answer of acharecha for a second, what does that seem to prove? That seems to prove that what did one get? One got the peiros. We're assuming he only got the produce, and yet it's going to his children. What does that prove? That proves that the owner of the produce is the main owner. That's a kasha on Reish Lakish. That's a kasha on what? Rabbi Yochanan. V'hatanya yachzru liyorshe nosein. We have another brisa that says that if number two dies before number one, then it goes liyorshe nosein. It goes to the heirs of A. If it goes to the heirs of A, the original guy, that conflicts with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that the rights to the produce is the main owner. Therefore, number one, when he inherited the rights to the produce, he should have inherited the land as well. And therefore, when number two dies and then number one dies, it goes to the children of number one. Zak the Gemara, Tnaihi, it's a machlokes Tanaim, the Tanya, Nichse lecha ve'acharecha leploni, v'yorad rishon u'machar ve'achal hasheni motzim yada lekuchos divrei Rabbi. That's Rebbe, which is like Reish Lakish, that he didn't have the right because, again, he only owned the fruits. And when you own the fruits, you don't actually own the land. Right to the land is the main owner, not the rights to the fruits. And therefore, you have the rights to the fruits. You have no right to sell it. And therefore, the Sheni is Motzi Miyad Lekuchos. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Ein li Sheni ela masha shir rishon. That the Sheni only has what the first one left. The Rashbag is like the Ri. He's like Rabbi Yochanan. They have a right because owning the fruits is like owning the land. And therefore, again, you see that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish each have somebody who they can hold like. This was a very difficult Gemara. I know that I did it quickly, but hopefully when you chazer, you'll be able to clarify it. Have a good day.